calling from a 704 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
This is Mitch Bolag in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Hey, Mitch. Yeah, thanks for calling in. I was connected to you by my friend who's doing Jewish Voice for Peace activism down in North Carolina, and she was just saying that you guys have been facing a ton of repression, so wanted to give you an opportunity to get the word out.
I appreciate that, and we appreciate all the coverage you've been giving to the situation in the Middle East and here, the repression here throughout the country. There was an encampment at UNCC, University of North Carolina here in Charlotte, which was very peaceful, and they had moved once already, and they were pretty draconially repressed and evicted from that space. And we have recently started a local chapter of Jewish Voice for Peace here in Charlotte, which is the largest anti-Zionist Jewish organization in the U.S., perhaps in the world. And we are trying to give support to the Palestinian struggle for freedom and to show that the trope that anti-Zionism equates to anti-Semitism is a real lie. And we're out in the streets demonstrating that it is not only possible, but it's the duty of Jews to oppose racism and repression and oppression wherever it is.
Mitch, where? Give me a sense of like how big your chapter is, and do we have numbers on the SJP?
We are a new chapter. We organized ourselves about 3 months ago, and we have about 20 active members now. We had been trying to organize a chapter a few years ago, and unfortunately, it took the recent events to motivate enough people to come out and unify around the theme of anti-Zionism. And there is a growing population of local Jews who are anti-Zionist, who do want to support the struggle of the Palestinians for freedom and to oppose Zionism, which is inherently a racist ideology.
Mitch, give me a sense of how, I don't have a sense of how old you are. I'm just curious as to how you, what was your journey to this? Had you always identified as an anti-Zionist? How did this come about for you?
I'm 68 years old. I grew up in Queens, New York, and I've been living in North Carolina for the last 45 years via Boulder, Colorado. I'm first generation American. My mother was born in Vienna. Her father died in a concentration camp. My father was born in Zurich, Switzerland. He came as a refugee, even though Hitler, of course, never invaded Switzerland. And I have always been opposed to the concept of Zionism, which has a long history and tradition of Jewish opposition to Zionism, contrary to what the supporters of Zionism try to portray. Quite the contrary of being anti-Semitic, anti-Zionism has a long history, has long roots in the Jewish community. And Jewish opposition to Zionism is based on various things: religious, social, political, and moral grounds. But ever since the birth of modern Zionism in the late 19th century, there has been a strong current of Jewish opposition to Zionism.
Did you get a lot with a lot of
belong to?
I'm about 10 years younger than you, and I certainly know that, when I was a kid, I don't know if you had Jewish education or not, but I certainly remember my Jewish education. A big part of it was, I would say, in order of content and import, was Holocaust, Israel, then cultural things and learning Hebrew. I wonder, what was your experience? I mean, as a kid, as growing up, when you started to identify this way or express these perspectives? Did you find pushback?
Well, right. There's always been, unfortunately, a pretty significant pushback within the Jewish community. I had a more secular upbringing probably than you did, but I was exposed to the same accusations of being a self-hating Jew for supporting Palestinians in their right in their struggle for human rights. And then when I moved to Colorado, and even more so here, I live actually 20 miles outside of Charlotte, kind of in the country. It's more of a rural setting, so there's not a large Jewish community around where I personally live. And Charlotte is a big banking center and is generally pretty conservative, and the Jewish population, I would say, is somewhat conservative and has been predominantly pro-Zionist. But as I mentioned, there is a growing anti-Zionist segment within the Jewish population, and Jewish Voice for Peace does speak to the Jewish community to try to specifically get Jews to support Palestinians
Mitch,
in conjunction with our Palestinian allies.
Right. And when you say that it's growing, right? The movement is growing. What have your conversations been like with, say, other Jewish family members or people who have previously identified as Zionists and maybe still do in the past few months in particular? What have you observed? Has there been any shift in the way that the conversation has gone, or?
I think there has been a big shift because I think it's harder and harder for any people, whether they're Jewish or not, who support the idea of Zionism or the State of Israel, to abide the horrendous actions that the Israeli government is taking, the genocide which is being perpetrated against the Palestinians. These are horrific events beyond human imagination that are being carried out, unfortunately, and why I feel so called upon to actively support the Palestinian struggle is because this is being done supposedly in my name as a Jew, with planes, bombs, guns, ammunition that is made in my country with my tax dollars. Every plane that bombs Palestinians is an American plane. Every bomb is an American bomb. And I think it's outrageous and obscene for certain people on the right to say that this is done for Jews or in the name of Jews. I think that's horrible. And I think that this is one of the few times in history when we have real-time visibility of a genocide, of an ongoing genocide being perpetrated.
Mitch, tell us how you started your chapter. If there are people around the country who are interested in starting a chapter in their hometown, how did you go about doing that? How did you connect it with the national organization?
As I mentioned, this is something that I had been thinking of since I retired several years ago. I attended a national convention of Jewish Voice for Peace in Chicago with a couple of other people from Charlotte, and we had some discussions. We talked about it. We had talked with national JVP, but it didn't really get off the ground. But there has been a wellspring of activity within the Jewish community. There have been many chapters and pods that have started up since October, and while their resources are stretched fairly thinly, JVP National is a great source of support in helping us with the day-to-day mechanics and other various types of support to get a chapter going.
So people can go to that. Yeah.
Right. If I can just make a comment about the this whole controversy about whether this is genocide or not, and people who are supportive of Zionism are quick to say that, oh, this has nothing to do with genocide because this wasn't like the 6 million Jews and 4 million other people who died in concentration camps. But that's a fundamental misunderstanding of what genocide is. And the United Nations declared the treatment of the Rohingya by the Burmese military junta to be a case of genocide a few years ago. And there are some comparisons. There were no concentration camps and gas chambers for the Rohingya. There are about 750,000 Rohingya who became refugees. This was a few years ago. Those numbers may have probably have increased. And there have been about 20 or 30,000 Rohingya estimated to have been killed by the military junta in Burma. And that is declared as an instance of genocide. And nobody at that time said, oh, no, you can't call that genocide because it was different than the Nazis. But that's not what the definition of genocide is. Now that is clearly being used appropriately for what Israel is doing to the Palestinians in Gaza, people are attacking the idea of genocide because they misunderstand what genocide actually is.
Right. I think it's also just in this country, right? The United States, despite the fact that we turned away many Jews who were fleeing the Nazis, want to present in the cultural imagination the U.S. as the victor since we were on the right side, moral victors since we were on the right side of World War II and opposing the Nazis eventually. But the genocides that happen really either outside the West's purview or perpetrated by the West don't get that same attention. And I guess my last question for you, Mitch, too, is I just wanted to, I know there's been some repression at some, I guess, encampments at UNC Charlotte. Can you speak to that a bit and how people can support also the students at UNC Charlotte who are calling for divestment?
Well, locally, there's a news conference in about an hour and a half at 3 o'clock. People can show up for that. There has been a petition signed by 107 UNCC professors and teachers in support of the students, which is a great thing. And there was a rally at 5 o'clock, which the administration threatened with all the participants with arrest. They said, oh, this can't go on, even though it's a peaceful demonstration, people expressing their right of free speech. And as it turned out, there were no arrests yesterday afternoon. One other point, if I can, what you mentioned about the West, and earlier you had talked about why this was the West's problem, not the Palestinians' problem. Part of the West's, the United States and Britain and other Western powers' support of the creation of the State of Israel was due to anti-Semitism. We didn't want the Jews here. We sent Jews back to Europe when they tried to flee here. The St. Louis was a famous example. And the millions of people who were in displaced persons camps at the end of World War II, most of them would not have chosen Israel. Most of them wanted to go to the United States or other Western countries, and we didn't let them in. We didn't want them here. We said, well, let's send them off to Palestine, and let's dispossess the Palestinians so we can get them away from our own shores.
Well, appreciate the call. Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, I just was going to sign off and say thanks for calling in, Mitch.
Thank you both very much, and thank you for the great reporting that you do.
Thanks so much.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.